Okay, so we're going to be talking a little bit more about tilt, which is a topic that's come up in every workshop, I think, except for the last one. So,
And it will come up in
and
the
it will
last
come up
one.
again. Okay, and well, I mean, except for the prior one, yes. So, here's a link. I'm hoping to the slides. This was done kind of late at night, like 11 or 12 or 1 after I had like 3 hours sleep. So try it and see. This should give you the ability to download a copy, to make your own copy of these slides.
Yeah.
And if we clean them up and fix them so they're more functional later, you can always download a new copy with us. But you can either type in that URL or scan the dinosaur, which is a phrase that had come up many times today.
Is it always a dinosaur?
Anything that Google creates will,
Okay.
yeah. And that's the quickest and easiest way of doing it.
Yeah.
Okay, so overview. So, when we hear faculty complaining about what's wrong with today's students or that type of thing, one of the things that comes up over and over again is student motivation, that our students aren't necessarily as motivated to do the work as perhaps we think they should be, or as we think we were back when we were students. Some of that is just a little bit of distance of time, but some of it is that students are doing less work. That when you look at American Time Use Survey data and so forth, we do find that students are spending less time on classwork. Some of it may be because they're working a bit more, but even 20, 30 years ago, when students were working less than they were 20 or 30 years before that, motivation was time spent on activities decline. And there's so many reasons for that. There's so many other fun things to do that perhaps weren't around. Mobile devices are part of that. In any case, that's one issue. AI and academic integrity is something that we've been discussing almost constantly for the last few years. We just got back from the CIT conference that was last week, and probably 60–70%, maybe more of the sessions either directly or indirectly addressed artificial intelligence and its effect on learning. Another issue that's been of a lot of concern are the equity gaps that we observe, that a lot of students are not, or students who are first generation students, students from traditionally minoritized groups and so forth, have a much lower probability of graduating successfully or progressing at the rate we would hope that students would be able to. And one of the things that the transparency in learning and teaching approach that Mary-Ann Winkelmes developed was that it can improve all these things. And there's been one of the things she's been doing is working with a lot of colleges and universities where they've introduced a tilt approach and they've studied the impact of that on student success, student effort, various measures of that. They haven't done as much with AI and academic integrity, but we'll be talking about that, at least some speculation about that here. And it does significantly reduce equity gaps in student success. In some cases, it's completely eliminated them. So I suppose we should, well, more of the motivation for this, that when students are given our assignments, we know what we meant by them, but our students may not know what we meant because they come into it with a different mix of information and expectations, and their expectations may not align with what we do. And I know many times I've given assignments where I get work back which is not quite what I thought I was asking for students, and some of that is because some of my expectations may not always be as transparent to students as they are to me. I know what a good paper is or what a good research paper looks like, but they don't necessarily, especially if they've come in from a background where they haven't had much work doing that type of thing. Students, when you ask them to do an annotated bibliography, often will have no idea what you're talking about unless you explain what that is.
Or lots of different kinds of writing beyond a 5-paragraph essay, really.
Which has been a bit of a bane on our existence for about 30 years now, apparently. I fortunately went to school before there were 5-paragraph essays as a concept, but it certainly dominated high school instruction for decades now. there's a great book on that by John Warner, I think
It's
it
on my
was,
list. I have
which
to, yeah.
which is basically killing the 5-paragraph essay, I think was the title of the book. But then that last point was something I was suggesting, that, you know, the students who are most likely to guess what you want from them are the students who went to high schools where a lot of people were going on to college, where they teach more college prep classes, where they were taught how to write research papers, where they were asked to do more of the type of assignments that we're likely to ask them. And one of the other things that often happens, and this we're trying to do as much as we can to reduce this, but you know what often happens is that if you have an instructor who has 2 exams or 3 exams in the class and there's no retake, there's no formative practice and so forth, it's really easy for students to fail their first exam and then give up, because the chances of them passing, or the highest grade they can get in the course, might be a C-. And if they did so poorly on the first assessment, they often will reallocate their time to doing something else, which might involve leaving the campus entirely. And, you know, our students are paying an awful lot to be here, and their hopes and their dreams and so forth are based on this. And it would be nice if we allowed more of them to be successful, or gave them a framework within which they can be successful. And one of the other things is that I know when I've, in my online classes in particular, a very large share of the work seemed to have at least been partly, if not entirely, generated by AI, even when they were asked not to use AI for these things. And it's really difficult to challenge that or to demonstrate or prove that, other than chatting with them and saying, you know, this is not your, you know, this does not appear to be consistent with the other work you've done. And generally they will confess, but it would be so much easier if we could just perhaps help students learn that we are teaching them some skills that are going to be useful. So the tilt approach is to demystify that process, optimize student learning. This is how she defines it. Help students understand the how and why behind the course activities and assessments, so they don't see it as just a series of hoops to jump through. And also it's been shown to reduce equity gaps. And the main point of what we're going to be focusing on today is, if students know why we're asking them to do things, they might be less likely to use AI, or at least that's the hope. And if they know that they're learning skills, if they know that perhaps working on some type of analysis may not be something they're going to do in the future directly, but they're going to be learning critical thinking skills and logical reasoning skills that will allow them to be more productive in other ways, that is useful. And if we can help them understand how that might be useful, that they might be more likely to do the work rather than just treating it as something that can easily be done by AI, and therefore they don't need to do it. So the basics of TILT are 3 things. With any assignment you give students, you have a description of what the purpose is and why it's meaningful, to help them connect to the meaning. This is very similar to the UDL approach, that they have to know why they're doing something. And then you describe the task in a way that's very clear to students. And sometimes providing exemplars can be helpful. And also how they're going to be evaluated, because the things that we think might be important might not be things that they recognize as being important, unless we're transparent about telling them, this is what we expect you to do, and here's the types of things you need to do to demonstrate that you've learned this material, perhaps. Okay, we kind of already talked about that. Just a couple of things to add. One is that the NACE competencies, the National Association of Colleges Employers, might be, if they're included in your course objectives, might make it easier or to connect to and so forth. There's a really good book that came out earlier this year by Anderson and Winthrop, called The Disengaged Teen, Helping Kids Learn Better, Feel Better, and Live Better. And we had a podcast with the authors, but basically the book talks about how students don't understand the purpose of most of the work they're doing, and they don't see how it connects to their lives. And that's been something that has been surveyed for decades now. And there's been a gradual increase in that. Faculty are reporting that students are less connected or less engaged with their classwork, and students are reporting that they feel that the coursework is less important or less relevant or less meaningful in their lives. And so if we can help them understand why they're doing these things, that's one of the things we could do. The other thing we could do is perhaps give them more authentic learning experiences that are tied to things that they believe are important. But moving on. So this was actually, I should have edited this more. This was from an earlier workshop on this, but here, one of the things you should do whenever you put an assignment together is state whether or how AI can be used in the assignment, and maybe state why. That if you want them to develop skills, state that explicitly. And as a result, you discourage them from using AI for this task. If AI might be useful for some purpose, like brainstorming ideas or something, then state that explicitly and say, this is a tool you're going to have access to in the future, and it's useful as a way of increasing your productivity so you can focus on these other aspects where your critical thinking skills can be brought to bear, or your other skills, or your creativity and so forth can be brought to bear. You talked about this a bit in the session this
yeah,
morning,
a little bit earlier today. Just, I think just being transparent about, like, listen, for example, earlier today, I talked about my creative writing course and how, I didn't want them to use AI so much in that particular course just because, like it's a 300 level class. Most of the kids in there are really serious about writing and developing their own skills. And realistically, right, literary magazines that they will be submitting their work to are not accepting AI generated work of any kind at the moment for creative stuff. So it just doesn't make sense for us to experiment using AI, in their polished produced work, because it's not going to be relevant to them as we sort of like keep going on. So I think that for them, that makes sense because it really connects to what's happening sort of like in their discipline. But in other courses, right, where like it could change, from one assignment to the next, like in my English composition course, I let them use AI in different ways. But then that transparency about like what and how is super important so that they don't get confused, because I don't want them to come to me and say, I didn't know, because then I feel bad for not being more clear about what I'm looking for.
So this should be part of the task, however you do it, just to make it clear. And again, this goes back to that earlier discussion that the students who benefit more from having more description, especially what constitutes valid work or high quality work, are the students who just haven't had that much practice with that type of work in their prior classwork. And we've got a lot of students who come from school districts where expectations are not always as high, in large part because a smaller proportion of students go on to college and the teachers gear the instruction to where they think their students are going to go. And, we do have all sorts of issues there, unfortunately. But the other thing is, if we get higher quality work, it's so much easier and more fun to read it. That if we get a lot of students doing work that is not what we had hoped they would do, it's certainly more annoying and depressing to read that work over and over and over again. And then, to the extent to which we can guide students to do high quality work from the beginning is so much better.
I find myself thinking of, like when I'm teaching English composition and it's time for them all to like turn in the drafts of their essays, and like they all have to do it in MLA style. And like by like the fifth or sixth time that I'm like fixing the MLA style heading, which is like a pretty straightforward thing to do, right? And like I have sample papers and we talk about it in class and there's resources, but like after a while, like I don't even like start to enjoy reading the content because I'm just busy looking for like whether or not there's a comma in the in-text citation, and there shouldn't be in MLA, right? So like it really is I don't know. I think we can get caught up in those sorts of things, and it can be really discouraging.
Details.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I would say the same because I'm APA and it's the same thing.
Yeah.
Like I'm reading through the content. I'm like, hey, are they doing this correctly? Because there is so many templates or whatever, and you're seeing them still do it incorrectly, but
this is one area where economics is a little bit different in that every journal has its own style, and it's generally a mix of Turabian or Chicago style, and sometimes MLA, sometimes, well, it's kind of amazing in that I've seen about 100 different templates to automatically reformat in BibTech information in the appropriate format for the appropriate journal. It's the most tedious thing you could imagine. Every time, if you submit something, I usually just submit things to one journal because I just don't want to deal with that. But in any case, so when I tell students to do the work, I said, pick a style, whatever one you want, and be consistent with it. And usually it's APA or MLA, but yeah, but we don't want to get bogged down grading crappy work. And if we tell students what constitutes non-crappy work, it makes it much more likely we'll get it. Criteria, we could share and co-develop the rubrics with students, and possibly AI could play a part of it, because AI does a really nice job of generating rubrics and be explicit in stating what each criteria means. What does it mean to be high quality, to be acceptable, and to be unacceptable, or however many categories you want, but often just 3 of them can. 3 to 5 is pretty common. And, our expectations of what we want students to do shouldn't come as a surprise to students after they've turned in their work. If they know what the standard is and what we're hoping they can do, they're much more likely to meet that standard than if it's some type of a guessing game. We're not hiding Easter eggs and hoping that people somehow eventually find them. Although sometimes people do hide Easter eggs in the syllabi and things, but that's another story. And the students who are most likely to guess at what's expected are the students who've been exposed to similar types of assignments. And those are not a very large share of our classes or student body any longer. We finally have a more diverse student body, but we do need to provide additional supports for students who haven't learned these things in high school or middle school and so forth. And if you'd like to, there's some examples that Mary-Ann Winkelmes provided of assignment redesigns. I think we can skip that and talk more about how AI might be used. And we already talked about this, that AI, or that tilt approach, is really helpful in improving achievement, student grades, student persistence. And again, studies have shown that when they were exposed to even just a single course as a freshman, up to 3 years later, they're more likely to be enrolled in college. So even just one course can make a big difference where this approach is used. And self-regulation, in that if students know what to expect, they're more likely to hold themselves to that, and they're more likely to meet deadlines and expectations, et cetera. Okay. So this is the whole thing. The main point is AI in principle can make it easier for students to cheat. But if we can shift the focus to grades, it will be helpful. So now what we'd like you to do is just to try experimenting a little bit. And we can do that right now. Let's just try one, and it would be good if you could try one on your own too. So I'm going to open up ChatGPT and bring it over. Now, ideally, what you would do is you would, unstable internet connection. Okay, ideally, what you would do is you would submit your learning objectives or an assignment to here and ask it to create a tilt approach based on the learning objectives for your course. But we don't even have to do that. So let's suppose, let's say I want to ask students to, let's see, create an assignment. Well, actually, who would like to pick a course? Some type of learning objective you would like to have students meet.
Analyze.
Analyze, period.
Yeah, analyze.
Well, okay.
Identify mathematical features such as linear, exponential, logarithmic, or quadratic functions found in business contexts.
Okay. Students analyze.
That's a better one than I
linear,
would have chosen, Michael. So
quadratic.
I like analyze, period.
Yeah, quadratic. see, one of the problems with typing, when you're not when you use only like 4 fingers and you're looking at the keyboard, is it helps to look at the screen at the same time. And cubic, was it?
Logarithmic.
Okay, and logarithmic. Functions. In a business context, right?
Correct. Yeah.
And then let's just say, formulate this in a tilt, or this is kind of simple, but formulate with all the letters this time, this as a tilt assignment in a tilt format. Let's say for a course in, let's say, business mathematics. And let's just see what it will do. I should know what a tilt format is. If not, you can always say using the tilt format of Mary-Ann Winkelmes. Here we go. It's got it.
It knows. I've used it to make tilt stuff.
Yeah, it's okay. And so here it does it. It tells you what it's doing. And look at that. Here it gives you the purpose, which aren't bad. Develop analytical thinking and decision-making skills using data-informed reasoning. Prepare for business fields, marketing, finance, operations, and economics, where modeling relationships and forecasting is crucial. And here you'll ask, or you will select or be assigned 3 business. You'll have to edit this, obviously. Giving you some functions that you might be using. Okay, except linear wouldn't be a constant rate of change, although that would be if it was a log.
Well, yeah,
well, it would be a
linear is
slope.
constant rate of change.
Yeah, you're right. Okay, never mind. Yes, I was thinking, never mind. Yes. I was thinking, yeah. And the log here is that, okay. And model it using appropriate functions, graph the function, interpret the. So what do you think? How does this look? So that's
pretty good.
And it's a starting point. If you don't like it, you can ask it to modify this, And then the criteria is the accuracy, identifying the appropriate functional type for each scenario, mostly corrected with some minor errors, or the incorrect function type, checking for the graphs whether they're accurate, clear, but some labeling or formatting or missing or unclear. And again, if you don't like it, you can change it. Oh, and you notice, because I've done it with Brightspace, you could actually format this in Brightspace format. Now, unfortunately, this won't quite work. And the reason it won't quite work is we've been prohibited from uploading CSV files for rubrics. And the reason is there's a global restriction on that, because that's how they upload students into Brightspace and other things that they use at the system level. And they disable our ability to do that.
Yeah, because I didn't see any upload.
There is no upload. Well, there is upload for many things, but you can only upload zip files and so forth. Okay. And this won't quite work, but it does put it in a CSV format that you could then put into a Brightspace rubric and just copy and paste the cells. So if you, file not found. Well, in any case, here's the different criteria. So, well, here's an HTML file. And you could copy it and so forth. So this is an assignment that you could copy into Brightspace using the source code option within a page. And where is the rubric? Oh, a zip file. Maybe now it will work.
Oh, try it.
Okay, so save this and a rubric as a Brightspace.
That would have saved me so much time.
Zip file. Now, I don't know if this will work, but if not, you could always save it as a Word document and just copy and paste the descriptions and the criteria and the weights in.
However, is a power.
Sure.
So helpful.
And it can, it can save quite a bit of time.
It did do it. Can we see if we can put it into Brightspace?
Yeah, except, well, maybe it would work because maybe it would work as a zip file.
There it goes.
Okay, let me open Bright. Oh, geez, I've got to authenticate. At Duke, I have to authenticate every 3 months because they don't have as much need for secure information there, where they do all this medical research and government research as we do here, where we might be grading student assignments. This is just going to take a second to log in, and because this would be so nice if it does work. It wasn't working when I last tried this because it didn't create the zip file. That must be. So I am going to go to an old course from the pilot semester, and let me just try. This was back in the summer of 2022 when we just got Brightspace, or the early adopters got it. We're going to go here. We're going to import, export, copy components, and we are going to import components from a course package, and we're going to start, and let's see if this will work. We're going to upload. If it doesn't work, you can still do it. You just have to copy and paste. So we're going to do a search for all files, and this should be in downloads, and here we go, right there. There's a zip file. Open it. Let me try that again. There is the Brightspace of time. I didn't select it apparently. Upload. Okay, so far so good. Except, why is that not giving me the option? Let me move it over to the other screen to see if there's something missing there.
Yeah, because there's supposed to be
there should be
a submit button.
There should be something at the bottom, and I can see it on the screen, but it didn't come across. Import all components, which I just clicked on, and I am going to bring this back over. Once I got to that, well, it does take a little while, but so far there's no error message. There may well be one, but even if not, you can have it create the rubric, copy and paste it, and adjust it. And it makes it really easy to do all these things. And now, if you upload your syllabus, if you upload your course objectives, or, more information about the assignment, it will take a simple few paragraphs of a course assignment and convert it into a format inferring what these things were, and you can always adjust them. This would be a good time to take a short break. Well, in any case, it's a great tool to have. And it just...
Oh, it actually says that.
Ideally, we should do this for all of our assignments, and I'm gradually doing more and more of this as I go forward with my courses and build, as I add new assignments and things. So, any questions? Or did you try this, Michael?
No, not yet.
Okay.
Let's see.
And another thing you can do for it with Tilt is, one of the things we talked about a little bit was showing exemplars of high quality work. You could have AI generate some examples of high quality work aligned with the rubric that you could then share with students, and you can ask them to do it in a variety of formats or a variety of different topics. Because one of the problems many of us have noted is that if we give students, say, 1 or 2 examples of high quality work for something, all of the assignments you get back are going to look like that one or perhaps those 2 examples, where people will pick one or the other and just try to emulate that style. So the more examples you can provide, showing students that there are many ways of meeting the learning objectives with different topics, different applications, the better. And again, maybe with the math function things, you know, with linear, quadratic, and exponential or of logarithmic functions, you know, there may not be as many different examples, but you know, for many other things, there could be.
Well, one thing I was doing last semester with my measuring life class was giving them a hypothesis test project that they needed to create. They needed to collect the data and analyze the data themselves. Would AI be able to generate some examples of
Data or find examples?
or find examples, create examples, maybe? Yeah.
Yes, to both. So for example, let's suppose, well, where's my AI tool? Is it
It's over there on that screen. Yeah.
over here? Okay, so let's do this. So let's say create, or let's say suggest, let's say 10 projects in which students are using, well, let's say multiple regression. Let's say in an introductory, in which introductory stats students, let's say, are using multiple regression analysis to estimate linear relationships. And let's say 10 project examples, basically. With data sources. Let's try that.
Okay.
There you go. House prices. You got a hedonic pricing model. College tuition as a function of characteristics using data from iPads. Both are good. Well, that's a good source. Using US CPS data. I did have students actually do some work with this, and you know, one of them was a little overwhelmed by the fact that they had about 3.5 million observations with CPS data, and they ran out of swap space on the computer. But their partner on the project actually did have enough space, so they were able to do it together. What factors predict box office revenue? This is a little bit tougher in terms of, unless they use something that's already been conducted. Life expectancy and national development using World Bank open data or using United Nations World Development Report would be useful. I'm not familiar with what data is available. Well, apparently there's some way of accessing Airbnb data.
Oh.
That I didn't know. And let's make sure it does exist, because you know, sometimes link isn't verified, but that's okay. Oh, there we go. So someone has put together data analyzed from here, from Airbnb listing by
right, so
cities and countries, and yeah, interesting. So you know, and electricity consumption as a function of the size of the household, number of appliances, income level, region.
Wait, what'd you put in again, John, to get that output?
It was so I just put in I asked it to generate data with 10 project examples with data sources.
Okay.
Now, I did have a student, one of the ways I know that this is possible is in my econometrics class, I did have students submit a project proposal that relied on data sets that were restricted access, that you had to get a special permit use to have. You had to have a secure data facility, and they wanted to analyze it using tools they had not yet learned. So it was pretty clear that this was AI generated. You know, and I had a little chat with them. I said, well, you know, these are, you know, I appreciate your, you know, your willingness to try to explore these things, but, you know, you should be aware that, you know, these are tools we haven't yet studied, you know, that we hadn't really done a lot with limited dependent variable models up at that point. So, You know, the conditional probit model that you were trying to work with was just not something we were not going to get to until later in the semester. But, you know, so what do you think? Is this the type of thing?
Yeah, I think these would work. Is there a way to like just open them up and see?
Yeah, you could just, well, you could just click on it and this takes you to the data set and there we go.
Mhm. So these give us the proposal and the data to create the
To a
projects.
link to the data, but yeah, and there's some time series data and here's some data sets. Now, whether the data sets are publicly available, well, statistical performance indicators probably would be. Yeah, you'd have to verify that the data sets are really something the students would be able to access for the purpose, but most of them look pretty reasonable. And here's a full data thing. Usually I tell students just to search for public use data files. But actually the World Bank though does have 7,329 data sets. So it's likely, oh, World Development Indicators would have, or the World Development Report would have that, for example. And they can pick the data and probably download them as, well, they're all spreadsheet data. So yeah. So that's not too bad. And now let's see if this has worked. It was not converted. This is what's happened before when I got CSV files. So sometimes when it creates things in Brightspace format, either it does not work or it's not, it requires something that's not enabled in our instance. And because this is a multi-tenant instance where every campus is sharing a part of the overall Brightspace, the overall Brightspace implementation, because it's shared across each college, more things are locked down than it would have been if it was just single campus instances. And it may be something with that. However, but let's see what the process can like. Most likely it was going to say that that CSV file could not be read. Here we go. No, in this case, the issue was the file size is 0 megabytes. And there was no plugin found for the conversion, etc. So it failed. But if you saved it as a Word file, you could easily copy and paste it in, which is, you know, what I think most people who are using it to generate Brightspace material are probably doing. But now going back to here, and what we could do is, do you want to pick one of these and ask it for a more detailed suggestion?
Yeah, let's try crime rates and socioeconomic indicators.
Okay,
That was number 10.
Okay. Okay, so now convert or use example 10 to generate a tilt formatted assignment for students with a rubric. And let's just see what it does. And look at that. Okay, so there's a purpose. Which looks okay to me.
Yeah.
Even including some reflection. The task contain the data set with links to different data. Specific research question, at least one dependent variable and some independent variables. Clean and prepare the data, run the regression, check for multi-linearity and discuss model fit, interpret coefficients and p-values, you know, and you could always adjust it if you prefer using t-statistics, for example, and then summarize it in a report or a presentation. And here's a rubric. And then for the deliverable, you could ask students to submit the data, the written report, the output, and so forth. And we'll skip the bright spacing. That'll probably fail. But you could ask it as an HTML file, and then you go into the edit the source version of a Brightspace page and just copy and paste it all in. So let's say, save this as an HTML file, because that's the native, that's basically how Brightspace pages are stored in a much cleaner format than that Blackboard crap did. Oh, it's not quite there yet. And so if we look at it, you get the whole, oops. And here's a web page or the Brightspace page. And if we looked at the source, we'd see that it all had the appropriate tag structure and it was all accessible. And there's a criteria, which again is embedded right in the assignment, but you could also, again, use a rubric when you evaluate it. But this way students know what they, what the criteria is right as part of the assignment.
All right.
And, you know, you could do the same thing for each of 10 or 15 or 20 different assignments and then ask students to pick one and to give them some choice so they could pick topics they're interested in. Or you could use these as templates of assignments and then tell them to do something different, but just to show the variety of the types of things that they might be doing.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, this looks good.
Yeah, I'm kind of impressed myself. I've seen this before. Jen, do you have any questions or do you want to try something?
No, I'm just confused. I came in late, so I'm too far confused to catch up. But I'm
Okay.
catching bits and pieces along the way.
Well, the main thing here is a tilt approach just takes any assignment you give students and you provide them with the purpose, describing why they're doing this, the task, which is a detailed description of what they're supposed to do, and the criteria that you evaluated. And what we were just doing is having ChatGPT generate a format for each of those. So if we look at the assignment, there's the purpose. This is why you're doing it, so that you learn how to use multiple regression analysis with real world data, interpret coefficients of significance and model fit in the context of public policy, use software to conduct it, and to strengthen communication skills, which is again one of those NACE competencies that, you know, businesses would like to see students come out stronger with, or to have stronger levels of. And then the task, where this is just one specific assignment we did, but we first generated a series of 10 of those. And then here's the details of how to do it step by step. And then the criteria, which is basically a rubric, and then a discussion of what they have to upload as part of the assignment. And that could be done right as an assignment format in Brightspace. All of which was seconds, basically.
Yep. Yeah, I'm toying a lot, and this is a different workshop probably, but I'm toying a lot with having students, because I'm preparing teachers. So, you know, there's benefit in writing your own lesson plan, of course, and I'm going to have them start by doing that. But then I'd like them to learn how to do a lesson plan online and through AI, and how to do rubrics through AI, how to do assessments through AI, because AI is going to end up being such a time saver for teachers, for everybody, but, you know, in my case, for teachers. And I want them to learn to the pieces and parts of doing each of these, but then learn how to create them using AI, and how to be critical about what they're finding on AI and change it to fit what they actually need, which seems to be the biggest issue they have. But that's where I'm kind of at right now. I'm making sure that I don't get just AI generated things that they just
Right.
did without looking at them. But I think the deliverables part is something I'm going to use a lot more, with having them give me a deliverable of perhaps the lesson plan they wrote, as well as the lesson plan that they got off AI, the original one, and then an updated one that fits them. So there would be multiple deliverables. And I like that piece.
And one strategy is to have them to do the lesson plan first, submit it to the AI, and ask the AI tool to create some, to evaluate it and suggest some clarifications, or to add more detail, or to evaluate any areas where there may be misunderstandings, and suggest alternative language, or to suggest that it be done perhaps in a more inclusive way, perhaps, or, to evaluate it for
Right.
inclusivity. So.
I'm also wondering, are students going to get, or do they have access to anything other than the free versions of any AI? Is the university going to hook them up to anything?
Probably not in the near future. And one of the reasons is that the versions that university gets cost more than individual individual accounts. And the reason is individual accounts are used to train the AI tool. And when you have institutional purchases of it, the data is all is not used for training purposes. So it's held in a more secure fashion. So, you don't have to worry if you have an institutional subscription to the data leaking out into the training database and becoming accessible by people outside of the institution. And it's expensive. That the institutional licenses for most of these tools are $25 or more per person, while it's $20 per month, while it's $20 per person for most of these right now for individual subscriptions. Now, having said that, SUNY as a whole is investigating the use of some type of a SUNY-wide AI tutor type project, where we're both on a committee that spent a couple of weeks during finals, because of course we have lots of free time then, every day meeting with a different vendor for 2 weeks, pretty much. I think, or maybe it was more. I think it was like 10 to 14 or different vendors. Yeah, I think the technical term is a tremendous number of meetings, where they're looking at. Right now, it's still the data gathering stage to see what's available in commercial chatbots and so forth. But the plan is to use the SUNY Empire AI budget or funds and project to create a SUNY institutional framework that will be done in collaboration with one of the vendors, which might be Google, it might be OpenAI, it might be Microsoft, it might be one of a dozen or so other vendors that are now integrating their services, connecting to the APIs, the public interface of one or more of the other tools. Because some of them will let you choose whether you use Claude or ChatGPT and so forth, but they keep all the data secure within the institution, and that data would be stored on the servers that are at Buffalo and Albany, where the Empire AI project is funded. But my guess is that's at least a year away, as I said last year, when we first learned about this.
Yeah, my biggest concern is asking students to do something and then them not having the capacity through the free versions to do what we're asking them, and then them feeling they have to. I think it's a great thing for them to actually pay for one and have it, but I understand that for some of them that's just cost prohibitive. And
we've been primarily talking on, I don't think anything we've talked about in sessions up to now could not be done on the free version. The only thing we've been talking about that does require a paid version is creating a GPT. And in that case, only the instructor needs to have the paid account. The students do not. So the difference between the paid and the free versions with most of the tools is just the number of queries you can get or the type of output. If you use ChatGPT Sora, you have a shorter video that you can create. And up until recently, only the paid version could create any videos. And similarly, until a couple of months ago, you could only create images in ChatGPT if you had either the paid version or you paid per image. Now anyone can do it, but I think the current limitation is 3 images for free users, and it's more than that. I'm not sure what it is for paid users now per day.
Yeah.
So, as long as you keep the use limited, the free tools work pretty well. And if students run out of queries with one, they could switch to another free tool.
Right. Thank you.
Well, any other questions? Okay, well, we'll stop this session, and let me stop the share and then stop the recording. And we've got many more sessions, including one coming right up.
Yeah, I was supposed to be in the next one, but I've got another meeting I have to go to. So I'll catch up with you later this week.
Okay, and we will record it, and it will probably be posted tonight anyway, if you want to go back and look at it. And then
Great, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Good seeing you.
Thank you.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye, Michael, and see you again too.
Thanks.